If you try to bring in some secular history, we know for a fact, based on secular history, that Nabonidus was a king in Babylon from 555 to 539, and that's what this handout says. Now, what this handout doesn't tell you is that we can go to some archaeological evidence that there are two things that was found archaeologically. One of them is called the verse account of Nabonidus, and this is where he, being king, entrusted to his oldest son the kingship. This is not strange. If you recall history during that period of time, kings co-reigned at times, co-regents. And then there is another one called the Nabonidus Cylinder that explains that Belshazzar was the oldest son of this fellow Nabonidus. So when we get to the question about him being third in line, it would be that Nabonidus and Belshazzar were co-rulers, co-regents, and then when Daniel did the prophecy, he would be the third in line. Now, his father gave Belshazzar, he was basically the king in Babylon, and this other fellow was off on a trip doing some other stuff for 10 or so years. Now, again, through secular history, they want to make a connection that this fellow, the reason that the Bible is saying that Belshazzar was a son or kin to Nebuchadnezzar was that this fellow had married one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters, and her name would have been Nitocris. However, there is nothing in secular history that directly ties that together. There's no proof that Nebuchadnezzar even had a daughter. In Scripture, your only reference comes in, as I said in Jeremiah, talking about Nebuchadnezzar, his son, and his son's son, as that being the period of the kingdom. So the only thing that we can definitely say was that Belshazzar was a king in Babylon, and he died in 539 BC, if we tie both Bible history and secular history together. This is where I say, if I have you totally confused and you want to go home and do some digging on your own, I've done my job. But do you see part of the problem we have? Now, Brother Clonch, I know you've been to school and studied this a lot. Can you add any light to what I've just said, or even contradict what I've said?
I think looking at England, you have all different Jameses, Henrys, number-wise, trying to keep up with them. Some of them change as far as from they're in Scotland to England, so it is hard to keep up with. And some of them are lesser importance, and they're not much said about them. So I think the same thing is true here.
And we can know for a fact that things are taken, that the chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8 are not in sequence, because if you read the first verse of chapter 7, what does it say? In the first year of Belshazzar. If you read the first verse of chapter 8, what do you see? The third year of Belshazzar. And now in chapter 5, at the very end of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6, you see Darius or Darius coming in and conquering. So we know that we're at the end of the kingdom. And then chapter 6 goes into more about that. So that's why chapter 5 is actually should follow chapter 8 in a chronological order. Now that I have you totally confused, questions or comments to this point? Two. Sister.
Obviously these references to Nebuchadnezzar being Belshazzar's mean, throughout Jewish writing, it's not always a direct lineage.
Right.
reference. It can just be your ancestors, your predecessors, you know, in this instance, it could be those that reigned before you. So, I mean, we're not necessarily looking for, we've got to follow the genealogy to connect the two. It's just a reference to, you know, the king before you.
Right, and we have even mentioned in class months ago on a different study where even though people are referred to as sons, it could have been our fathers, it could have been grandfathers or great-greats or all the way back through the line. So as long as there's some kind of connection. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I was just saying, I don't know if you've covered it or not, but I think it does in the later lessons here, is that the reason for this lack of chronology, I guess, is really we kind of get the story portion of it out of the way, and then from chapter 7 on in Daniel, we pick up with the visions and interpretations that, yes, they do happen kind of throughout what we've already learned about in 1 through 6. And so I think that's the reason why Daniel is split up in that way, even though it's not actually chronological.
Right, and we see this all the time in newspaper articles or books or everything else, where you follow one thread and then you go back and pick up and fill in with the other. But here in chapter 1 of verse 5, after we've discussed Belshazzar, the king, he made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. While he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. What had his father, putting it that way, what had Nebuchadnezzar done with those items that he had taken out of the temple? Had he misused and abused them this way? I'm sorry? He put them in the treasure. He put them in a safe place. He didn't misuse them or abuse them in any way. Now, the phrase, one of the questions is the phrase, what does it mean that he tasted the wine? Feel the effects. That is a fantastic phrase for it. Because as we go through here, if he were simply taking a little sip of it to taste and see, that's not going to affect his reasoning abilities. And once a person gets inebriated or on the path to that, they start losing their sense of judgment. Why do you think he would bring all those things out of the temple if he were in his right frame of mind, if you want to put it that way? He wouldn't, would he? So this to me indicates that he was feeling the effects of that when he did this. When they brought the golden vessels that were out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, and the king, his princes, wives, concubines drank in them, they drank wine and praised the God of gold, of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. Now, remember that there were many gods that the Babylonians worshipped. The primary one was Marduk of Babylon, but Belshazzar, and you can find this in secular history, he was trying to make the moon god the number one god, so there was a little bit going on there. But anyway, they took the items out of the temple, the holy items from the temple, misused them, and then tried to praise gods of gold and silver and things of that nature. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. So Belshazzar is at least feeling the effects of the wine, and now he sees a hand come down and start writing on the wall. I love verse 6. Then the countenance was changed. What does it mean his countenance was changed?
Face grew pale, color drained out of his face.
Face grew pale, color drained out. Countenance just means his appearance, the way he appeared. Now, while he was inebriated, possibly to the point of being giddy or a little bit fun-loving, happy, when he sees that hand, all of a sudden things change. And then it said, and his thoughts troubled him. I think I'd be troubled also if I saw a hand come down and start writing on this wall. So that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. What does that mean? He was literally scared almost to death. He didn't die at that point, but studying psychology, you will find that a lot of times when you've heard the phrase fight or flight, when somebody gets scared, there's actually a third F in there. Freeze. You either freeze, you fight, or you flight. Have you ever seen or know of anyone or heard of anyone who, when they get scared, they pass out? Faint from fright. You also, when people get so scared, apparently as he got so scared here that he lost control of his body movements, his knees knocked and all. We've heard people say that when they get up to speak that their knees are shaking and all. That's a form of being scared. But here it appears as though he was scared to the point of, as Brother Dave said, on the verge of dying there. He was so scared. And then it said the king cried aloud. What's another thing people do when they get scared? They scream. So he cried aloud. He didn't just say, bring me my astrologers in here. He was yelling that they get there. He was in a hurry to take care of things. Bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing, show me the interpretation thereof, shall be clothed with scarlet. What's the symbol of scarlet and being clothed with it? Pardon? Important. Wealthy. Royalty. Then put a chain of gold about his neck. Another symbol of, and then shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now, here's the question. If a man is so frightened that he's willing to give anybody that can give him an interpretation of something, royal garments to wear, valuable gold chains to put about the neck, and move them from whatever position they hold to number third, the third ruler of the kingdom, how afraid was he? How badly did he want somebody to tell him what was going on? So then all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. So apparently he got a little bit, if there was any way to be more afraid when his astrologers couldn't help him out, that just notched it up just a little bit more. Now, verse 10 is also a very interesting verse. Now the queen. When we think of a king, who do we normally think of as the queen? His wife. However, he is a co-regent. There was another king, his father, who also probably had a wife. It is also possible that Nebuchadnezzar or Evil Marduk, wife, queen, had not yet died. I think personally, I put a question mark by this verse because I don't think we're talking about the queen, Belshazzar's wife, because what knowledge would she have of what had gone on with Nebuchadnezzar years before? So it could be a queen mother or one of the others that were older in that line. We have no way of knowing, but to me it just makes sense that if the queen is going to explain to him about Daniel, who this king had no knowledge of, then it seems like it couldn't be his wife. It has to be somebody else a little bit farther back in the lineup. Brother Golden.
I think also this queen, I know in other cases they had to ask for permission to mate with the king, and everything was a was, and this queen did not have to do it.
Right.
And
And that's part of the reason why I said it was probably a queen mother, somebody farther back up that even though he's the king, he has to sort of cater to her wishes too. So, anybody else? But what she said anyway was, by reason of the words of the king and his lords came into the banquet house, and the king and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever, let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. Find that interesting? She knew about Daniel, but yet she is still using the plural of gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father the king, I say thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. So, as Alyssa had said, this doesn't necessarily mean that it was a direct descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. His son or his grandson could be a great-grandson, but somewhere in the lineup there's family there that's being referred to. And verse 12 says, For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Now, verse 12 goes back to what Brother Golden had said. Back during this time period, when the king, if you recall the story of Esther, what would have happened to Esther if she was the queen? What would have happened if she had gone in without the king's permission, or he had acknowledged her favorably afterward? She had been killed. Here, it's not only that the queen went in to him and talked to him, she told him what to do. Now let Daniel be called. So she's advising the king. So again, to me, that just means that she's a little bit farther up in line than his wife. Brother Golden, again, please.
I read that the word she used for the gods was Elohim, which is actually a plural form of the one God, Yahweh.
Okay. I hadn't read that, but that's interesting.
She possibly, along with Nebuchadnezzar, did believe in one true God.
Okay. At least she had faith in Daniel. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king, my father, brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof, but they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretation and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about the neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let the gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation.
He evidently did not understand what the interpretation was going to be.
The king at the time had no idea what was about to take place. And Daniel wasn't in it for the glory or for the money. He was going to, and then verse 17, through a few verses, recounts what we just covered in chapter 4, talking about the Nebuchadnezzar's. Let's see how much time I got left here. And talking about when his heart was when he was prideful and all, what happened to him. If we skip then down to verse 22, and thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this. I find that phrase interesting because, again, he believes in multiple gods. He had to be told by the Queen Mother to go get Daniel, so he wasn't aware of Daniel. So what does it mean that he didn't humble his heart, that he knew all this?
It doesn't matter to him, he's gonna do what he wanted to anyway. Even though he may have been aware of it, it's still,
Okay. He was at least aware that the things that were put in the treasury, the spoils of the captivity, was not supposed to be used in this manner. And as Brother Clarence said, it didn't matter that he knew it, he was going to do it anyway. And this is where I think that the wine had a little bit to do with it. He was had lost a little self-control there and was just doing this. And then verse 23 says, But thou hast lifted thyself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone. Look at this next part. which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all the ways, hast thou not glorified? Here he put it in one little nutshell, if you like. Idol worship is vain and worthless. Because what can a piece of wood, stone, or all the other objects, what can they do? But in the world today, there are several religious groups that still believe in and worship and have idols and altars and different things set around. And the one true, the living God, they don't want to have anything to do with. Verse 24, then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. So Daniel immediately tells him that that hand that he saw writing what was on that wall was sent from God, the living God, the live God. And this is the writing that was written. And I'll probably mispronounce these, but it's Mina, Tekel, Upharsin. Now, if you will look at your questions and answers, when we get to question number 21, it uses Mina, Tekel, and Perez. And the note explains that that phrase talks about it being a conjunction and plural and also it's a form of this word in the Bible. Upharsin is a form of the word that they use Perez when he asked the question there. But what the interpretation of Daniel is the word Mina means that God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. It's what Brother Cox said a few minutes ago, that the king didn't know what this was going to happen. He didn't know it was going to be quite this severe. But the days of your kingdom are numbered. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. It says, numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Your kingdom is coming to an end. The next word, Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. What does the word, if we put that in our language of today, what would that phrase mean? Thou art found wanting. Short of expectations. We would use the phrase lacking, L-A-C-K-I-N-G. And then the last word, Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. What had Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the gold head and all the statue, what was next in order? It was going to be divided. So here's the division about to take place, that the Medes and the Persians. And then commanded Belshazzar that they clothe Daniel with scarlet, put a chain on his neck, make a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. Belshazzar still doesn't know that he is about to die. He thinks he's just lost his kingdom. And then in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. Now, this is when Darius, or Darius, I don't know which way y'all like to pronounce it, when Andrew and I are doing our reading at home on this, we sometimes read it one way and sometimes another, just depends. But this is when Darius of the Medes had came into Babylon and captured Babylon, and they slew Belshazzar, and that was on October the 12th, 539 BC. And we can find that through secular records. And then Darius the Mede took the kingdom, and at the time he was 62 years old. I want to add in something here that I've got just a few minutes to cover, because when it says in chapter 6, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom. This Darius is a different Darius than the one in verse 31. The Darius, the Mede that captured Babylon when Belshazzar was killed, he was succeeded. His name, he was actually Ugburu of Gutium, Ugbaru of Gutium, Gutium. A month later, November the 6th, 539 BC, he was killed in battle. And then he was succeeded by Darius Gubaru, Gubaru, which you won't find that in the Bible. That's some secular history, but just for your information, we're talking about two different Darius here. Questions, comments?
It's interesting to note that this didn't just happen. God didn't decide to depose him, to divide this kingdom, for this to end that night. It didn't happen because they took the vessels out from the temple and used them. And that was the final straw. That was the last bad decision that was made. But this decision had already been put in place back in Nebuchadnezzar's day. And if you study anything about the way that they came into the city and took over and the things that happened, there was a lot of preparation that had already been done prior to this time. But it's just neat that they were in there doing that thing. Again, just another most blatant example of all of the things that they had done against God. When that hand started writing on the wall, and that very night is when they came in and took over.
And it also, I had another voice over here, just a second. It also goes way back to the very beginning when they were told that they would be in captivity for 70 years. Now we're getting down to the end of that 70 years. This kingdom is destroyed. At the time Darius comes in and takes over on the Mede side, Cyrus is the king on the Persian side. So you've got Cyrus, who will come in just a little bit later after Darius here, and then start getting them out of captivity. So it all just weaves together. Brother Clunch, was it you that started saying? Yes, sir.
I think it's sort of odd that after Belshazzar hears the news and this interpretation, which isn't good for him, he still goes ahead and gives Daniel all this blessing, I guess.
Still thinks he's got this kingdom going on. Yeah. We've only got about 2 minutes left, so if anybody got anything at all on this chapter? Brother Golden.
It was interesting to me how they took Babylon. They had formed a moat around it to protect it from the Euphrates River. So I think it was Cyrus or one of the generals diverted the Euphrates River to where that moat dried up. And they could just go right into Babylon.
Yes, sir. It is real interesting, some of the wars and the battles that took place, because we think of this battle here being a short period of time, but as Brother Golden said, there was a lot of preparation done before this could take place. And if you read in some of even if you come up to what we would term a little bit more modern history, 70 AD, when Jerusalem was sieged, they didn't just surround it and siege it. They took the time to build a siege mound. We also know that Vespasian was the general that did it, and when Nero killed himself. He left the battlefield, left his son Titus in charge, and then they went through Otho and Galba, and then Vitellius became the emperor, and then his son Titus, he told him to go ahead. So 2 years it really started in 68 AD that the siege against Jerusalem started, where they built the siege mound. They surrounded the city. Vespasian was off here, Titus in charge, and then he told him to go and take the city. So battles back in those days were long-term battles, not short-term battles. Thank y'all so much. And I misspoke on Vitellius. It was Vespasian that was the general and the father of Titus. Thank y'all.